So once more, the Daleks have returned, again written by David Whittaker, but this time without Dennis Spooner doing rewrites. But this also marks their final appearance in the black and white era, with them facing their final end. We've also got a new companion to be introduced, so there's quite a lot to unpack in this serial. But let's begin at the beginning with part 1. So this review will be a bit different, as the serial is a lot like An Unearthly Child and The Daleks, in terms of it having an almost separate part 1 to the rest of the serial. So the serial continues right on from The Faceless Ones, with the Doctor and Jamie searching for the TARDIS, which they find being taken away by a truck. Because of this, episode 1 and a bit of episode 2 take place on contemporary Earth, before the rest of the serial changes the time and location. It is revealed that the TARDIS was taken on the orders of a man named Waterfield, who is a seller of Victorian antiques, but he isn't all that he seems to be. The Doctor and Jamie are sent on the wild goose chase, which takes them to a warehouse, and then a bar, which depending on the version of the serial you watch or listen to, may or may not have music. At the bar they meet a man named Perry who has been told to find them and tells them to go to Waterfield's shop at 10 PM, but they arrive early to gain an advantage. Due to this early arrival, they arrive just after Kennedy has been killed. Kennedy was a man working for Waterfield and was trying to steal his money from his secret vault, which contained a time machine which he activates and summons a Dalek. Kennedy is killed, which allows Waterfield to set a trap for the Doctor and Jamie, which allows him to take them back with him. So the first episode and a bit is very different to the rest of the serial. It's used to great effect to build up a mystery about who Waterfield is and why he's doing what he's doing. An obvious thought would be that he's a time traveller, and while true, the execution and reveal of how he has come to be in the modern day is a good twist. So as we later learn, Waterfield was performing time travel experiments with a man named Maxtable, and when experimenting with static, they made contact with the Daleks, with the Daleks using him to bring the Doctor to 1866, where they're operating from. So the reveal of Waterfield being a time traveller is well done. We have him running an antique shop, with the antiques being sent to him from time to time. He also refers to guineas instead of pounds when dealing with money, which is a nice subtle thing as the guinea had been phased out by this point, but was still occasionally used in paperwork, including by the BBC. This is also a really cool way for Whittaker to reuse the Daleks' time travel abilities, but in a new context with a more limited time machine which restricts them. So with the Doctor and Jamie in 1866, the two are introduced to the situation, with the Daleks giving the Doctor their ultimatum, that being for him to find out what the human factor is, with Jamie being their test subject. The tests in question occur throughout episode 4, where he has to survive traps and fight against a servant of Maxtable, Kemmel, so that he can attempt to rescue Victoria Waterfield from the Daleks, who are holding her hostage. Beginning with Jamie is the best way to discuss the serial, as he holds the earlier episodes of the serial together, as many plot points are either introduced with him or are built around him. As explained before, Jamie is a key part of the Daleks' plan, but he is kidnapped shortly after waking up by a man named Toby under the orders of a man named Arthur Terrell, although he doesn't seem to be all there, as he insists that he didn't give any such orders and refuses to pay. I'll discuss Terrell more in his own section, but for the moment I'll make note that he has a split personality of sorts in the serial, which comes into play a few times when he runs into Jamie. So a key part of this serial is the Doctor and Jamie's relationship, with Jamie beginning to lose his faith in the Doctor. But given that this is only the second serial in which they're properly interacting, it means that the groundwork is quite flimsy for them having a strong relationship to be broken down. Additionally, I don't fully understand Jamie's doubts in the Doctor, with it feeling a bit hurried without much going for it. So Jamie thinks that the Doctor is working for Waterfield and Maxtable, claiming that the Daleks are around. But given that Jamie has never met the Daleks, it means that he has no idea about them or what they can do. And I feel like he should have really known enough about the Doctor by now to know that he might be playing along to learn about the enemy. Now I can understand that Jamie would be annoyed about the Doctor saying he's going to be used, but Jamie never brings this up to the Doctor and just becomes annoyed by his presence before he storms off to find Victoria. In fact, the Dalek thing is made worse as Jamie overhears Waterfield talking about the Daleks too, meaning that they are there so the Doctor isn't lying. So if we're assuming that Jamie has either met the Daleks off screen or knows about them from his travels with the others, then he should know that the Doctor might be acting differently given the gravity of the situation. It's a very weak conflict which the story needs for things to move along. So this goes into episode 4, which consists mostly of Jamie making his way through the house, dodging traps, Daleks, and first fighting, and then making friends with Kemmel. Ultimately, the two of them reach Victoria, but she is taken away by Terror while they are barricading the door from the Daleks. From there, after a sword fight with Arthur, Jamie is reunited with the Doctor, and they sort their differences. That's kind of it for him, I'll admit. There are plenty of strong moments between him and the Doctor, but for the most part the serial is dominated by this iffy character arc until the final 2 episodes. I'll talk about Victoria now, as she does very little in the serial, acting as a damsel in distress for the majority of it. And when I say majority, I mean the entire thing. Now it's obvious why the new companion character is like this, and it's because she wasn't intended to be a companion until late in the day. Although I've got no evidence for this, given that Samantha in the previous serial was meant to be a companion and Victoria was made into a companion later, it probably means that this happened so late in the day that there wouldn't have been much time to change the script in any drastic ways. She doesn't appear in episode 1, and then she spends episode 2 and 3 in a cell, then episode 4 occasionally calling her name from a balcony, then being moved around for the rest of the serial until she's one of the few survivors. She does have a nice relationship with Kemmel, but I'll discuss that further in his section. She doesn't spend much time around other characters due to being in prison for the majority, although her opening scene is great. We have her feeding some birds at a window before a Dalek forces her into a scanner, which reveals she is losing weight due to having trouble eating due to the situation. And Deborah Watling is great at selling Victoria's fear. Something to note that is odd is that Deborah Watling had a holiday during episode 4, which would have been her third episode on the show. This is presumably due to her last minute casting, although she does appear in pre-filmed scenes. On Kemmel, he is introduced as a big strong guy who doesn't speak, feeling more like a slave to Maxwell than a servant, with his first scene being used to demonstrate his strength to a Dalek. From there he battles with Jamie until falling out of a window and Jamie chooses to save his life, which changes Kemmel's view of him, and from there they work together to save Victoria. So to explain why Kemmel wants to save Victoria, but also wants to kill Jamie, he is led to believe by Maxwell that Jamie is an enemy, but once Jamie saves him he realises the truth. Something I find interesting about Kemmel is that he's more intelligent than Maxwell thinks he is, something which just adds to Maxwell's self-centered nature and affects the plot greatly. Maxwell sees Kemmel as a primitive he can use and manipulate, but Kemmel isn't. He has a sense of right and wrong and is able to understand when he's being lied to, when he's presented with the truth. And he does have a limited ability to both read and write, even though he can't speak. Throughout this era we see that he is quite a soft person despite his imposing figure, having many sweet moments with Victoria, with a favourite being when she offers to protect him and he just smiles as they both realise how silly she sounds. Although his death at the end is quite badly handled, but I'll come to that when discussing the final episode. On Maxwell, he is a very villainous character. Despite everything that happens, he constantly sides with the Daleks and refers to them as friends, entirely so he can gain access to the ability of transmutation of metal into gold. He is an incredibly greedy person, and this ends up being his undoing, with his house and laboratory being destroyed by the Daleks, and him eventually becoming the first human Dalek. He does have a daughter who is nothing like him, being a far kinder person, but there isn't much to her, and even Maxwell is quite a simple character, with his greed being his most notable trait and most dominating. Now for Terrell, he isn't the most fleshed out of characters, mostly to do with his split personality. We have his friendly side who wants to find and save Victoria, and his evil side, this evil side being a creation of the Daleks. So the Daleks have placed a device on him, which allows them to control his mind to an extent, which also gives him a slight electromagnetic field as noted by the Doctor, plus seems to prevent him from eating or drinking. This device isn't given much in the way of an explanation, but appears to remove, or at least suppress his more human-natured traits, while bringing the Dalek ones to the forefront. Although of course, the device isn't perfect, and so he quite often ends up in a mental struggle between these two sides, although he doesn't seem to be aware of the other side's existence. His most memorable scenes are when he is trying to drink but can't, and then later his sword fight with Jamie. So before discussing the Doctor, let's discuss the Daleks and the final two episodes as they change the location again, this time taking the fight to Skaro, or as it's called by Maxwell,
to Skaros.
The serial does change things up for the Daleks by introducing the Dalek Emperor, and revealing that the Daleks have brought the TARDIS to Skaro, even if they seem to have switched the doors, which is something which will be present for the entire next season of the show. So the Emperor reveals the Daleks wanted the Doctor to find the human factor so they could implant it into the Daleks, but this turns out to be a ruse, as they instead wanted to know this as it would allow them to find the Dalek factor, with their ultimate plan to spread the Dalek factor throughout the history of Earth. So this plan is both cool and incredibly over the top. While the discovery of the Dalek factor is interesting, and the potential they can be used to Dalekify any species is actually a terrifying concept, the spreading it through history of Earth is the bit where it feels over the top. The Dalek Emperor is vague with the Dalek's plan, but I assume it's to go back to the dawn of man and give humanity the Dalek factor then. Now I call it over the top, but it has a sense of being a bit too Earth focused. Instead of the Daleks wanting to spread it to the wider universe, they're focused on this one planet. While it's not a bad plan, it just takes me out of it for a moment. But this leads to Maxwell being Dalekified as a test subject, as the Daleks set up an archway which will subject anyone who walks through it to the Dalek factor. Maxwell's greed is what makes him walk through it, as he is given the formula for the transmutation of metal into gold, but in the room on the other side. The Doctor is also subjected to the Dalek factor, but it doesn't work, and so he is able to sabotage the machine. So I think it's finally time to talk about the Doctor and his part in the serial. So I've already mentioned that the Daleks wanted him to find out what the human factor is, and that was so they could uncover the Dalek factor, but in the experiment the Doctor converted 3 Daleks using the human factor, on the orders of the Daleks. This is also when he and Jamie begin to patch up their relationship, with the Doctor revealing everything and Jamie finally believing him. So there isn't admittedly much to the Doctor until the Daleks are humanised. Jamie holds together the majority of episodes 2 through 4, especially 4, as Troughton was on holiday, and so the Doctor only appears in the few pre-filmed sequences in which he's explaining parts of the human factor to a Dalek. But when the Doctor and Jamie reunite in episode 5, I still don't believe the conflict between them, as their relationship is only just forming, but they'd been together too long at the same time. This is obviously a problem that's come from Jamie being a very undefined character for so long, but fortunately this conflict between them is mostly ignored once the humanised Daleks finally activate and act like children. The Doctor gives them all names, both to identify them and to give them a sense of individuality, something unique for the Daleks.
Alpha. Yes. Beta. Yes. Omega. Yes. Alpha, Beta, Omega, Alpha, Beta, Omega.
This then leads to them returning to Skaro, and I'll talk about that in a bit as this will be important. For the moment, the Doctor's Dalecification. So after heading to Skaro and encountering a fake humanised Dalek, the Doctor finally meets the Emperor and refuses to help him, which leads to him being tricked into going through the Dalecification archway. He pretends to be Dalecified and replaces the Dalek factor with the human factor, and so all the Daleks who pass through are humanised. Now this is probably one of the darkest things the Doctor has ever done when you think about it, and coming from this lighter incarnation is so shocking and catches you off guard. So I'm going to break away from the Doctor as I need to address the end of the serial to discuss this. So when the Daleks are humanised, they essentially regress to questioning children, something the Doctor is fully aware of, and so by humanising these Daleks, he is well aware that the other Daleks will not stand for it, which leads to the first Dalek Civil War. So the Doctor is essentially sending children into war and actively creating more of them as the battle goes on. So the Doctor creating a civil war between the Daleks isn't that dark of an idea, but the context of how he is creating the war is. And this may actually be his darkest moment yet. Apart from the countless Dalek deaths, we also have the deaths of Kemmel, Maxtable and Waterfield. We'll talk about Kemmel and Maxtable's deaths now, as how things play out is unbelievable. So after escaping from the city, Victoria and Kemmel are confronted by Maxtable on the edge of a cliff. The two of them end up getting into a struggle with Kemmel falling to his death, with Maxtable walking back to the city where he presumably dies. Now the reason I don't believe this is that Maxtable is nowhere near as strong as Kemmel. We're given a scene which demonstrates how inhumanely strong Kemmel is, but then we're meant to believe that this old man is equal in strength. So this presumably has something to do with the Dalecification, but that's just not convincing me, as there is no precedent given for there being any physical changes, only mental. This does mean that Kemmel's death is very underwhelming and out of place, which could be due to Victoria being made into a companion late in the day, with Kemmel having to be killed off as they weren't going to return to Earth anymore. On the other hand, Waterfield's death is much better handled and is quite powerful. So while the Doctor is making more Daleks question the Emperor, he is nearly exterminated by a Dalek, but Waterfield saves him and is shot in his place. And these final moments between the two of them as Waterfield is dying are so strong. This becomes even more upsetting when you realise he had barely seen Victoria since her capture by the Daleks, with them briefly reuniting in the cells before being split up again, with him choosing to help the Doctor. This is one of the most powerful deaths in the show so far, and has plenty of emotional weight due to the strength of Waterfield's character up to this point. Whittaker has always proven to be great with character, and it really shows here in one of his best moments. It's so unfortunate this scene doesn't exist. For a few behind the scenes things, we obviously have the Dalek Emperor and its guards. The guards were originally intended to be Supreme Daleks, but due to the rush production, they weren't fully painted and have in retrospect become the unique Emperor's Guard. Then on the Emperor itself, the head of the Emperor was partly made using a Chumley prop. I don't often mention the music, but I'll talk about it here, as Dudley Simpson's use of a variant of the show's theme for a Dalek theme is great and really distinctive. Then finally we have the iconic line,
"Look at the size of that thing,"
which was originally intended to be, "Look at the balls on that thing, Doctor." But Fraser Hines couldn't say it without breaking down in laughter. The Doctor reunites with Jamie and Victoria, and the three of them head to the TARDIS, which was moved out of the city by Maxtable. As the trio leave, the Civil War reaches its conclusion, as the humanised Daleks breach the Emperor's chamber and launch an attack on it, with its guards fighting until the bitter end. At last, the end of the Daleks. Or maybe not. So the Evil of the Daleks is a bit of a wonky serial, but it's still very strong. On the other hand, you have the weak conflict between the Doctor and Jamie, but on the other the strong characterisation of many characters and a lot of exciting set pieces. I have often referred to this as my favourite of the Troughton-era Dalek serials, but in retrospect that may not be the case. That opinion has come up due to it featuring my favourite TARDIS trio of the Troughton era and the epic final battle. But beyond those highs, it's a lot shakier than the previous one. I wouldn't call it bad by any means, but by comparison it's definitely a weaker serial, although better than most of the Nation Dalek serials. It's definitely high on my list of serials I want recovering, especially the last 3 episodes on Skaro. So now we have a new TARDIS trio with the addition of Victoria. Let's see if she can stand against her predecessors or fail to impress. I mean, I know she will and she is a favourite of mine, but let's pretend we don't know that yet.